Hello, Michael over here. Just wanted to take 5, maybe 10 minutes to go over some things about the beginning of The Handmaid's Tale. Now, you've watched my other videos, those older videos on the overview of The Handmaid's Tale, and I kind of wanted to take a step back with that, and I wanted to talk about the response essay and to clarify the reading schedule a little bit. So first things first, let's talk about the response essay. So there are two response essays that you will do or complete before we write the full essay. And so these are kind of lower stakes assignments that are intended to get you thinking about the themes in The Handmaid's Tale. Now, if you've already started reading, fantastic. And I'm going to do a little bit more setup. It probably is going to cover some of the things that I covered in some of my other videos, but I think it's worthwhile to sort of recap those things. So the first thing is, let's talk about the first response essay. So the response essay is due October 17th, and it's worth 10 points. This is an essay which will be a minimum of 2 pages and a maximum of 4 pages. That is typed double-spaced. And please do make sure to include your header in the upper left-hand corner of the page and your last name and page numbers in the upper right-hand corner. If you have any questions about the header or the spacing, please let me know or review other assignments. So really what we're working on with these response essays is reading, analyzing, and evaluating information and really trying to figure out what it is that Margaret Atwood was getting at or trying to get at with The Handmaid's Tale. So there are 4 prompts that you're going to address. Well, I should clarify. You're going to address one of 4 possible prompts, and these prompts are similar from the response essay 1 to response essay 2 to the literary analysis essay. So the first one is to take into account how the events in those first 6 chapters mirror things that have happened or are happening in our present world. Atwood wrote this in 1984 in West Berlin, but somehow this is still relevant today. Perhaps it is this sort of question of history being doomed to repeat itself. And as we know, if you read, hopefully, real-life events that inspired The Handmaid's Tale, you'll know that things like Kristallnacht, which was this Nazi program to remove all possessions and businesses, or not possessions, but businesses and money and things like that, a lot of rights from the Jewish people, mirrors something that will happen later in the book. We also know that things like female genital mutilation are mentioned in the book. I have to admit that I never would have picked up on that personally, but I think that it is a fair observation. We also have things like the Decree 770 in Romania, which promoted childbirth. It became the law that every woman must have 5 children, and if you didn't have children, you were taxed for it. So you could compare some things that are happening in The Handmaid's Tale in the first 6 chapters to those things or other things that may come up to you. The second prompt that you could write about is this sense of ownership and space as it relates to privilege and power. So some of this, what I mean by space, is where in the physical house, say take the commander's house for example, do characters have space, a room or something like that. You might also take into account what things they are permitted to own. And one thing that you might consider there is broadening out from material goods to things like names, right? And other possessions. So we know in the very first chapter we learned that Offred has moved into a room where she owns nothing. Everything's sort of issued to her. And she sort of refuses to call the room her own. So again, what does that tell us about her? The third one is this question about hope or hopelessness and happiness. So you could take that into account and look at what role hope plays in this book, and that might set you up for looking at a couple other events that will happen later in the book that provide Offred with hope. The last option is to compare the first 6 chapters to the first 3 episodes of the Hulu TV show. Now, my suggestion, if you are to choose option number 4, is that you read the first 6 chapters first, and then watch the show and compare and contrast. What characters are left out, and why might that be? What other adjustments are made throughout the book? In interpreting the book into a TV show. So I want you to think about all of those things. Again, it is a 2 to 4 page formal paper using evidence from the book. What we are practicing here is close reading, right? So we're practicing our close reading skills and trying to understand what is happening in the book and why Atwood made specific decisions. Now, if you come across some other observation, something that kind of puzzles you, I would suggest you either bring it up on the discussion board or email me or start to investigate it for one of your papers. You can go a little bit off script with these prompts. Okay, so moving into something which I don't think I delved into in previous videos is the epigraph. So there are actually 3 epigraphs in the book, and they look like so. If you can see that, 3 short quotes that Atwood has chosen to start a book. And if you're like me, a lot of the time you go ahead and you skip these epigraphs, but there's often important information. It's almost as if the author is giving us a little hint or a little clue about how to understand the book in general. So I'm going to suggest that you get your copy of the book, you pause the video for a moment, you look at those 3 quotes and try to understand why they're there. Now, no cheating, don't go and look on Google to try and understand them. I'll be trying to explain them a little bit more here in a moment. So go ahead, take a moment, pause the video, and then we'll move on. Okay, so hopefully you've looked at those 3 quotes. We've got one from the Bible, we've got one from Jonathan Swift, who is an Irish writer and a satirist, and we've got a Sufi proverb. So let's start with the quote from Genesis, and I think this is probably the most straightforward and easiest to unpack. So it says, "And when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister, and said unto Jacob, Give me children, or else I die. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, Am I in God's stead, who hath withheld from thee the fruit of the womb? And she said, Behold, my maid Bilhah. Go in unto her, and she shall bear upon my knees, and I may have children by her." So this is interesting. So Rachel is really saying, if I don't have children, I die. I cannot have children. Go to my maid, have children with her, and they will also be my children. Now, as we move forward, and especially as we get to the relatively creepy ceremony in the book, this will have like a lot of resonance. It also has to do with the context of the book in which people are not having children and the fertility rate is dropping, which is the pretext for taking these women, making them into handmaids, and assigning them to commanders. Okay, so that one seems pretty straightforward. The other side note that I'll mention here is that Rachel, of course, the character mentioned here, is part of where we get the name for the Red Center, or Rachel and Leah Center, which is where the handmaids are trained or indoctrinated into the system. So let's go ahead and turn our attention to the next one, because I think the Swift quote makes a lot more sense if we have context. And I think it's not even so much about the specific quote as it is understanding where the quote came from. So it says, "But as to myself, having been wearied out for many years with offering vain, idle, visionary thoughts, and at length utterly despairing of success, I fortunately fell upon this proposal." So this is from Swift's A Modest Proposal. Little side note here, which I think provides context, is that the actual full title for A Modest Proposal is A Modest Proposal for Preventing the Children of Poor People from Being a Burden to their Parents, to the Country, and for Making Them Beneficial to the Public. Why is that important? Let's contextualize it further. Swift is writing at a time period when there's a lot of famine going on in Ireland and people cannot feed their children. So what do you do with these children? It's kind of the opposite of what's going on in The Handmaid's Tale. The solution that he sets on, being a satire, that is sort of a social critique or tongue-in-cheek criticism, is that we should feed these babies to the rich. Literally. So take that into account as you read this, because the babies are metaphorically, in The Handmaid's Tale, being fed to the rich. All right, so the third and final one is perhaps the most puzzling. So the Sufi proverb reads, "In the desert there is no sign that says, 'Thou shalt not eat stones.'" And I'll admit as well that on first reading this, I was somewhat puzzled. Does it mean that if you were in the desert, you can do what you need to survive? Perhaps. And that undertone, I think, carries through logically with the story. Atwood has reportedly said, "There are no thou shalt nots about things no one wants to do anyways." And so what she's getting at there is, you don't have to tell somebody not to do something that they don't want to do, right? So if I don't want to do something, you don't need to tell me not to do it. Generally, we need to tell somebody not to do something if there's a strong desire for them to do it. So desire lies under there as well. So I think it's an interesting sort of dual meaning, and as has been pointed out elsewhere on the interwebs, there may be some connection here to the religious aspect of the society and religious rules, it being a Sufi proverb. So again, in the first bit, we get Offred, whose real name we never find out, although we might assume that it is June. We get the aunts, Sarah and Elizabeth, also biblical names, who are sort of guards/teachers at the Red Center. The commander, the commander's wife, Rita and Cora, who are Marthas. And over time, we learn we are introduced to the concept of Luke, Nick, and I think there are a handful of other characters. So as you go about these first couple chapters, what I'd like you to do is really be thinking in the back of your mind about concepts of power, concepts of space. If you're gonna go ahead and watch the movie, the TV show, what things do you think they might change? And kind of branch out. What we're doing when we're conducting close reading of a literary text is engaging those close reading skills and being active readers, asking questions, annotating, marking things, and really interrogating the text. The last thing that I want to leave you with is a little bit of a clarification about the reading. I don't know if I've mentioned this in other videos, but this online section is running concurrently with a class that I have in person. So those students I engage with Monday through Thursday, and some of them have asked questions about the reading schedule. And I know it can be confusing because there is this table of contents here at the beginning with Roman numeral chapters, and there are also numbers throughout, like so, at the beginning of sections. So when I say that I want you to read chapters 1 through 6, I'm talking about the Roman numeraled chapters here. So 1 is night, 2 is shopping, 3 is night, 4 is waiting room, 5 is nap, and 6 is household. So where I would like you to be on Monday of next week is to have read all the way down through household, which in my version of the book, which looks like this, will take you through page 100. Now that is important, and I've adjusted the reading slightly because on Monday I will post in another video that will look more in depth at those first 6 chapters. Okay, so should you have other questions, comments, concerns, once again I've done it. This video is much longer than I originally anticipated. Should you have questions, comments, concerns, email me. I will do my best to answer your questions there. As a one last side note, your personal narratives, I am hoping to have graded by Monday as well. I can make no promises because they do take me a little bit longer to read and think about. All right, I think that wraps it up. Keep an eye on the Canvas board. Post questions where needed. There's a new little open discussion forum that I've put there, and we'll go from there. Thanks, and have a great weekend. I'll talk to you all, in air quotes, in the near future.